What do you guys think that Ryan would say if I use a fork to dig up the soil? Would he be upset with that?
Don't do it, Josh.
All right, Ryan, so you reacted to my tree in the greenhouse.
Wow, Josh.
I would have liked for you to only see it for 3 seconds and then that to be it. But now that you've got a little bit more time, what are some of your thoughts now that you've had more than a few seconds to see the tree?
Yeah, so I guess, whenever we talk about feedback on a tree, constructive criticism is always the best, right? Because I recognize you put a lot of energy and time into this, and bonsai is not easy. It's not.
No, it's
This
not.
was very, the one thing that I experienced in your journey is, this is freaking hard.
Yeah, all right, here goes.
So I'm glad that you got that piece of it, because now you understand why I'm such an asshole. No, I'm just kidding. What I was impressed with in the greenhouse is how you crossed the bridge, right? Of sort of being paralyzed by indecision to coming about a design that I really think had some environmental direction and reflection and had some drama in the design, right? And so I want to break it up into 2 parts, technical discussions as well as aesthetic discussions. Okay, and let's start with aesthetic first, because I think that's where all of our heads are at, right? I love the angle that you've chose. The base is beautiful, but the biggest part of the angle that you chose is the line of the trunk. You reconciled a very challenging issue, which is there were perpendicular lines and parallel lines that existed in the design. And all of those, although nuanced in terms of being past perpendicular or parallel, you were able to find, I think, a very good line in the trunk, right? You have a great base there. I think as you tease away the soil further in the repot, it's going to get even better, and there may even be a piece of movement at the base. Good decisions, like good objective design decisions. You put the knowledge to work, and it rewarded you, right? It gave you something very spectacular.
Yeah, it felt good to know that I was making pretty informed decisions based on what I've learned previously in the other episodes. So
Nice.
That definitely felt good, but the challenges started when I was like, okay, now I have to make decisions on what branches to cut off, how many branches do I really want to be working with here? Yeah, so that was a big challenge from there.
Totally. Now, as we move up the tree, clearly the branch on the right you chose as your defining branch. I thought there was a pivotal moment, depending on where you were going to go with the design, where the branch on the left could have been a really interesting design.
Okay, it's decided. And then I'll also
So that happened.
chop this guy.
You chose the branch on the right and you accommodated that design, and this just goes to show that there's no one right way to style a bonsai. And I thought that was a really interesting design discussion, and to see where you went with it, where I would have gone with it, and to know that both of those directions are quote unquote right? There's multiple answers to a singular tree. That's a big thing, I think, for all of us to come to the understanding of. So I'm very interested in the direction that you chose, and I think you executed the branch to the right well. Now I think you have a slender trunk. Elegance is associated with a slender trunk. And the length of the 2 branches that come off of that right structural piece is almost the same. So when we dive into the nuts and bolts of aesthetics, I would have loved to have seen the initial branch that sits in sort of the midsection of that prime. Yeah, that. To take that to the back and bring it forward again and pull that length in so that you establish a little bit of in-out movement would make a big difference.
Yeah, that's something that I struggled to do because I got fairly confident with my wiring once I tried wiring this a couple of times and failed and tried again. And then when I finally succeeded in some way and felt that I had some control over the branch, I was like, okay, cool, this is what I can do. And then I probably wired this one 3 different times. And by the time I made it here, I was like, okay, I would love for this to have some more movement in it, but I don't know if I can accomplish that without literally destroying the branch.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
And because I had gone with this design that has fewer and pretty minimal branches on it, I was like, I don't know if I want this to be dead.
Right.
So
right.
I would love to make that possible in the future if I can.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this just goes to show too, when you're learning bonsai, of course we can't create the perfect tree in the initial go, even for a professional, but when you're learning bonsai, to accept, this is as far as I could take it now. I really appreciated the respect that you showed the tree. You weren't afraid to take that step and go that distance to create that design. but you're also showing some restraint. And I think that's the fine line and the balance there. So that's beautiful. Continuing on the structure, as we move up into the apical region, you get to this fork where you have a piece on the right and a piece on the left. You chose the piece on the left as your apical region.
Which branches are you talking about?
So right at the fork from the trunk.
Yeah.
So where the trunk fork, yes. So the piece on the right, see how it's thicker?
Yeah.
Just as a structural. And the piece on the left is thinner?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so to make the piece that is thinner, the apex,
right,
and to make the piece that is thicker, a branch, is a little bit counter to the natural, intuitive way that a tree would grow.
Right.
Not a rule, because there are definitely times where that is a valid decision. But it catches my eye because I want to follow that thicker line just intuitively as I understand trees to exist, as my brain understands trees to exist. That's a catch point for me. So do we fully do away with the piece on the right so that you don't have that reference? Or in the future, would you choose to follow that line towards the thicker, more dominant piece? That's the thing to consider.
I recognize that this area was an issue, and I was trying to play off of this movement here as like an interesting branch, with the movement being ideal for kind of what I was going for. But yeah, I now that you pointed out, that is something that like probably I was like recognizing as an issue aesthetically, but didn't fully.
Yeah. And it's not, and again, it's not wrong, but in the future,
yeah,
just the same as you might change that branch, you may choose to do away with the piece on the right entirely, and then it would be a seamless transition, right?
Cool. Yeah.
And then the last piece, I would say, is when we get to the top of the tree, you have two branches that are oriented from that singular junction. You chose to bring the lower of the two up as the apex, the one in front up as the apex, and you chose to take the higher of the two down as a branch. So you get this kind of action, this kind of scissor action, right? Yeah. That higher piece is structurally the best apical piece. And that's where we have to follow the hierarchy of the tree. This is how we say the tree objectively leads the dance of design.
Right. It's, again, something that I didn't necessarily think through, that it's nice to find those little points that now I'll be.
These are solid, fundamental design points that you should always consider. Not necessarily abide by. They're not solid, fundamental design rules. They're design points. Okay, because when you think about it, you have created a tremendous amount of asymmetry to the right. But in choosing the lower branch, which is the less ideal apical region, you've centered your apex over the base of the tree, even though you've created a significant degree of asymmetry and you have a base to anchor that asymmetry. To have used the upper piece that is intuitively and inherently as a structural piece the best apex would be to push the apex off of the center of the base, tap into that asymmetry, and fully commit to the design that you started. Right?
Cool.
And those are those nuances where you just, boom, level up your design, level up your design. But for a first iteration, the first tree you've ever designed, I am very impressed. I'm very impressed.
While you have been helping me out so much, it was nice to know that I could kind of take what I've learned from that experience and actually apply it here. And I think that does also kind of reflect what it's like to be a Mirai member or to follow on YouTube, and to take the information you're gaining from that experience and then apply it to your own practice and just like go for it.
Yeah.
So recognizing that there's a lot of space for additional branching closer into the trunk, how realistic is it to assume there's going to be like back budding along these branches moving forward so that I can get more like ramification and more secondary branches?
Yeah. So this is where developmental fertilization, right? And again, on Mirai, you can check out the fertilization stream. But when we talk about fertilization, trying to get back budding is a product of the needle mass functioning and the supplemental nutrition of fertilization assisting in that higher rate of metabolism. There's a very strong chance with a piece of nursery stock or a young tree that you will get budding very far into the interior, and that's how we start to build that ramification.
Awesome. Cool. I did before, like when I was doing my secondary wiring, I was like plucking some of the needles that were easier to pop off. Like I wasn't ripping off needles, but I was like, because some of these, some of the ends of these branches were just like, it was packed full of needles and I wanted to get my wire up to the tip. Is that appropriate to pluck the needles up to the point where you want the wire to end?
Yeah, definitely. Now, I think you have to look at and always weigh how many needles am I removing, to try and get to the end of that branch, because sometimes we would say maybe it's at a point where we can't get to the end of the branch. But for this tree, being a short needle single flush pine specifically, that's a very standard practice to be able to control the tip of that branch. Okay, now this would bring us to how do we control the tip of the branch? Because I noticed that a lot of your branches are brought up here and I can see the secondary or the tertiary wood of the branch, right? When you wire that, you want to wire and end your wire right at the base of those needles, and you just want to prop those needles, but I don't want to see the underside of that branch, right? So that lift is a little bit exaggerated. There are some that are pretty nice, but there are some that are a little bit, right? And to lay that down and boom, just bring that tip up, that's the real nuance of wiring a pine.
Yeah.
Specific to pines, nuance to pines, to get that presentation of needle. That's a more advanced technique. I wouldn't look for you to be nailing that on your first pine that you've designed. That's impossible.
Yeah, I was actually aware of it, and it was really difficult to try to achieve, and I recognize that it's very likely positioning the last couple turns of the wire in the right way in order to achieve that, because I was just like, I'm trying to, I was like, trying to have my pivot point be like, right at the tip, and like I was like, oh, this isn't possible for me. I just didn't place it in the right way, or my technique wasn't there yet.
Sure.
But yeah, that's good. I'll definitely, because even some of these, it's clear that like it's almost making a semicircle.
Yeah.
And I wasn't happy with that.
But it's a good start. It's a good start to know that you orient it here. That's how you begin. We talk about that point that you have to hit in the secondary, tertiary wiring video on Mirai Live that you can reference now. And when you start bonsai design, there's so many things you're trying to consider that it's impossible to hit every one of them. Now that you've touched on a few of those things, you see how you can improve, you can further hit on the next sort of round of technique the next time you work this tree. So you let it recover, you let it regain its strength, and the next time you come back, you're gonna be that much farther ahead.
Cool. In terms of depth, I was trying to play with some background and foreground branching, but I realized that I didn't necessarily have too many branches to put in front of the trunk, or to play with the foreground in front of the trunk. That's something I guess I could play with once I have more ramification internally or closer to the trunk. But is that something that, like, with one of these branches, should I maybe have played with that and had some more foreground?
I mean, I think you have foreground on the closest branch on the right, but I think actually putting pieces in front of the trunk is more a discussion of what is the character of your trunk, right? Because the thinner the trunk, the more of the trunk you want to see. The thicker the trunk, the more you would interject branches into the front of the design and just show the very base of the tree. That, from a traditional bonsai creation perspective, would be how you balance that and take that information. I think you have a really nice distribution of branching. You've got background, you've got middle ground, you've got foreground, and you see the entirety of the trunk line. I think you've struck a balance that's quite nice, actually.
Cool. And I was very much influenced while designing it on like coastal trees, and that's kind of what I was just thinking about. I was kind of visualizing while I was setting the structure. Do you, in terms of the natural growth habits and the way that actual like coastal pines look, like were my decisions kind of accurate in any way with that? I mean, like the branching, kind of going up and then down and then going up again. Is that representative of nature in any way?
I mean, I'm sure, and here's the thing, when we represent environment, you could definitely find coastal pines that go up and then back down and then maybe back up again. So there is always going to be a validation of the design decisions that you make if you look for it. I think typically though, coastal wise, initial movement of the shoulder is up, right? And when you turn this tree to the right and the primary piece drops down, to not come back up with a commitment, I think is where you deviated from the coastal model in that initial defining branch that set the character of your tree. And I think inside of that, you do see some confusion in the design. The other piece of coastal would be that the apex is very broad and oftentimes very flat with that influence of wind. Your apex has more of an alpine feel. It's quite small, it's quite triangular, right? And so the attempt and the exploration, there are definitely nuances of coastal in there, and we can continue to bring those out as we advance our skills.
Cool.
It was good. It was a job well done. From the videos that we watched to the unveiling in the greenhouse when I got to see it for the first time, I was like, wow, cool. Very, very
Cool.
cool, Josh.
What are some of the key like sort of moments for you when you were watching the clips that stood out in terms of like good points for me to take note of?
Yeah, I would say the preformed hook as a structural element, which is going to be a part of nursery cultivation, right? Everybody's going to have to use the preformed hook to establish structure. Learning how the preformed hook functions, learning how to enter the obtuse side of the shoulder as that branch emerges from the trunk, and understanding structural wire on that level is what empowers the structural wire to function. That would be something I would say everybody needs to focus on, right? Because I think a lot of the branches that you wired, you entered the acute side of the shoulder and it made it tougher for you to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, right? That would be one. One major one, technically.
Cool. Awesome. All
Good.
right. Thanks, guys.
Boom.
Bonsai is a process of building. We learned how to find a piece of material, now we're learning how to clean a piece of material, then we're gonna learn how to prune a piece of material, then we're gonna learn how to wire a piece of material. It's this step-by-step cumulative building process, and each point is this amazing experience to get to enjoy, right?
Yeah, definitely. All right. Oh, hello.